Mr. Speaker, last night, the Committee on Rules met and granted by a recorded vote of 8-4 a rule providing for consideration of three measures. First, the rule makes an order a motion offered by the chairman of the Committee on Appropriations that the House concur in the Senate amendments to H.R. 7148, the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2026. The rule provides 1 hour of debate on the motion equally divided and controlled by the chairman and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their respective designees. The rule further provides for consideration of H.J. Res. 142 under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chairman and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform or their respective designees. And finally, the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 4090, the Critical Mineral Dominance Act, under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chairman and ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources or their respective designees and provides one motion to recommit. This rule advances a motion to concur in the Senate amendments to H.R. 7148, the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2026. Specifically, the Senate amendments to H.R. 7148 strike the Homeland Security Appropriations Division, replacing it with a CR through February 13, 2026, and make other conforming changes to the text of the bill. Mr. Speaker, by concurring to the Senate amendments to H.R. 7148, the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2026, we will end the Democrats' second government shutdown and fully fund the following departments and agencies for the remainder of fiscal year 2026. President Trump's Department of Defense, President Trump's Department of Labor, President Trump's Department of Health and Human Services, President Trump's Department of Education, President Trump's Department of Transportation, President Trump's Department of Housing and Urban Development, President Trump's Department of State, President Trump's Department of the Treasury, and many agencies related to each of these departments. Simply put, a yes vote on House Resolution 1032 enables us to consider legislation that pays our soldiers in the United States Army, providing $54.5 billion in military personnel funding to support active duty soldiers, 172,000 reservists, and 328,000 National Guard members. A yes vote enables us to consider legislation that pays our sailors and the United States Navy, delivering $40.5 billion to support 344,600 active duty sailors and 57,500 reservists who keep our sea lanes open and our country secure. A yes vote enables us to consider legislation that pays our Marines and the United States Marine Corps, investing nearly $17 billion to support 172,300 active duty Marines and 33,600 reservists, sustaining the readiness of our most forward deployed force. A yes vote enables us to consider legislation that pays our airmen and the United States Air Force, providing $38.7 billion to support 321,500 active duty airmen, 67,500 reservists, and 160,300 guardsmen defending our skies. A yes vote enables us to consider legislation that pays our Guardians and the United States Space Force, investing $1.49 billion to support 10,400 active duty Guardians, a growing force critical to modern national security. And a yes vote enables us to consider legislation that gives the brave men and women who are defending our country a well-deserved pay raise of 3.8% to ensure their compensation reflects the value of their service and sacrifice. A yes vote on House Resolution 1032 enables us to consider legislation that funds the Department of Labor's Veterans Employment and Training Services, otherwise known as VETS, a program that serves America's veterans and separating service members by preparing them for meaningful careers, providing employment resources and expertise, and protecting their employment rights. A yes vote on House Resolution 1032 enables us to consider legislation that funds the Department of the Treasury's Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, a critical component of our national security that disrupts and disables terrorists, criminals, and other direct threats to American citizens and protects our country's financial systems from abuse by illicit actors. A yes vote on House Resolution 1032 also enables us to consider legislation that funds the Department of Transportation's Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, and our country's air traffic controllers who keep our skies safe. Given my district's proximity to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, I proudly represent more air traffic controllers than any other member of Congress. During the Democrats' previous shutdown, our Democrat colleagues used our air traffic controllers and their families as political pawns, forcing them to go without pay for 43 days. Mr. Speaker, I hope the Democrats do not subject our country to yet another prolonged government shutdown, but only time will tell as we will vote on House Resolution 1032 within the hour. Mr. Speaker, the rule before us also provides consideration for H.J. Res. 142, a joint resolution disapproving the action of the District of Columbia Council and approving the D.C. Income and Franchise Tax Conformity and Revision Temporary Amendment Act of 2025. On December 20th, 2025, the District of Columbia Council enacted, without the mayor's support, legislation to decouple areas from the federal tax code and deny district residents and businesses the local tax conforming impacts of several tax benefit provisions of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Simply put, the District of Columbia Council doesn't want its citizens to benefit from the largest working families tax cut in American history. Specifically, the District of Columbia Council wants to deny its citizens the ability to enjoy the increased standard deduction. The District of Columbia Council wants to deny its citizens the ability to enjoy no taxes on tips. The District of Columbia Council apparently wants to deny its citizens the ability to enjoy no tax on overtime. The District of Columbia Council apparently wants to deny its citizens the ability to enjoy the no tax on auto loans. And finally, the District of Columbia Council wants to deny its citizens the ability to enjoy additional charitable deductions during tax season. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask my Democrat colleagues why the District of Columbia Council took these actions, but I think we already know the answer. It's politics, because this happened before, following the various tax cut packages during President Bush's administration. This happened yet again after Congress passed the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017. When a Republican president enacts tax cut legislation, the District of Columbia Council swiftly seems to act to deny its citizens its benefits. I applaud my colleague, Representative Brandon Gill, for introducing this legislation. Representative Gill is a rising star in our conference, our freshman class president, and a very good friend. Mr. Speaker, the rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 4090, the Critical Mineral Dominance Act, legislation that codifies certain provisions of 3 executive orders by President Trump relating to domestic mining and hard rock mineral resources. During our last election, voters across our country overwhelmingly voted to unleash America's energy potential, and this legislation fulfills that mandate. This legislation requires the Department of the Interior to annually report on the dollar value of the overall economic impact of each mineral commodity for which our country is import reliant. This legislation requires the Department of Interior, in consultation with the Department of Agriculture, to identify priority mining projects on federal lands that can be immediately approved and to be expedited for completion. This legislation directs the Secretaries of the Interior and Agriculture to identify all federal lands in their broad jurisdictions that may be suitable for hard rock mineral exploration, development, and production. Finally, this legislation targets legal and regulatory bottlenecks that impede domestic mining by directing the Department of the Interior to revise or repeal rules and regulations that hinder mining projects. Rolling back regulations is what Americans want and is precisely what this legislation delivers. I commend my colleague, Representative Pete Stauber, for introducing this legislation. Representative Stauber is a natural leader of the Committee on Natural Resources who continues to swiftly deliver for his constituents and all Americans. Mr. Speaker, passage of this rule enables our House of Representatives to debate and consider legislation that ends Democrats' second federal government shutdown, unleashes America's energy potential, and lowers taxes for working families, seniors, and small businesses within our nation's capital. I urge all of my colleagues to vote yes on House Resolution 1032, as it allows for our House of Representatives to govern just as the American people deserve. Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the gentleman from Georgia for yielding me the customary 30 minutes and for his riveting presentation, and I yield myself such time as I may consume. Before I say a word about the rule or the bills in front of us, this is the first full day that we have convened since 2 federal officers shot and killed another American citizen in Minneapolis, Alex Preddy, an ICU nurse who took care of our nation's veterans. Alex was on a public street. He was exercising his First Amendment rights while filming federal agents. He was exercising his Second Amendment rights as a law-abiding concealed carry gun owner. He was doing what any decent person would do, helping a woman off the ground after she'd been shoved down by a federal officer. And for that, he was punished with death, shot by his own government. This wasn't an isolated tragedy, Mr. Speaker. It was the second public killing of an innocent American in Minneapolis tied to Homeland Security. Renee Good, a mother of 3, was shot by ICE on January 7th, mere weeks before the murder of Alex Preddy. Mr. Speaker, as co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, named after our former colleague, the only Holocaust survivor to serve in the United States Congress, I have spent years documenting and standing up to human rights abuses carried out by authoritarian regimes against their own people. So let me say this plainly. A functioning democracy does not execute people in the street. That's the kind of thing you see in North Korea or Iran, not in the United States of America. It is beyond the pale. And in my view, this administration and those at the Department of Homeland Security in particular should not get another cent until there are some serious actions taken. I personally believe we should abolish ICE and start all over. But at a minimum, there needs to be some serious systemic reforms made. Which brings us to today's rule debate. Over the weekend, the Senate acted on the government funding bills House Republicans sent them 2 weeks ago, except for a short-term CR that continues DHS funding at the current levels for the next week and a half. And I want to be crystal clear about where I stand. I'm voting no. I'm voting no. I will not stand by and give any more money to Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem to bankroll an out-of-control operation that is terrorizing communities and shredding the Constitution. We are watching masked, armed agents force their way into homes without judicial warrants. We are seeing blatant violations of the Fourth Amendment. We are witnessing agencies act with impunity. We are hearing about kids getting kidnapped on their way to school and grandparents dragged from their homes. And we are listening as government officials smear dead Americans as domestic terrorists instead of answering basic questions about what happened. So I am not interested in business as usual. Not for 2 more weeks, not for 2 more seconds. A federal judge recently described ICE's conduct in January as an extraordinary pattern of defiance of court orders. They said ICE, and let me quote, likely violated more court orders in January of 2026 than some federal agencies have violated in their entire existence, end quote. That should give every single member of this House pause. It's certainly my red line, and I think it ought to be a red line for this whole body. And Mr. Speaker, it's not just DHS funding. This package also gives a massive increase in funding to the Pentagon. Why are we writing a blank check for the so-called Department of War while this administration threatens allies, breaks the law, and treats Congress like an afterthought? Why are we giving Pete Hegseth more money than the administration even asked for, while we get fewer answers, fewer guardrails, and fewer constraints on reckless action? And on top of all of this, Republicans have jammed in a measure to repeal D.C.'s new tax law. Let me just tell my colleagues, this would blow a $600 million hole in D.C.'s budget. Over $500 million gone because Republicans in Congress want to meddle in local governance when they can't even manage a budget of their own. I mean, they just added $4 trillion. That's $4 trillion to the national debt in their one big ugly bill. Let that sink in. I mean, it's ridiculous. And the mayor and the chairman of the D.C. Council warned that this would throw a huge wrench into D.C.'s current tax filing season and force people to refile their taxes. That is insane. And if this bill becomes law, they would be ripping away D.C.'s new child tax credit, money that would go directly to families to help them put food on the table and reduce childhood poverty. I mean, Republicans talk a big game about family values, and then they turn around and take money out of kids' pockets. It is shameful. And by the way, you can't make this stuff up, but this measure had no hearing and no markup. So much for regular order. And when I asked the Oversight Committee chairman yesterday basic questions about D.C.'s budget, basic questions, he had no answers. He had no idea how big D.C.'s budget is. or how much D.C. spends on the metro, schools, or infrastructure improvements, or how much money D.C. raises in local taxes, and how much of a budget shortfall their outrageous bill would cause. I mean, these are the most basic questions that you could possibly ask about whether to overturn D.C.'s tax law, and he couldn't answer them, had no clue, So let's be honest about what this is. Powerful people in Washington telling local communities, sit down, shut up, we know better, and then leaving working people to clean up the mess. And the final bill in this rule is another massive giveaway to mining CEOs and polluters, and that lets them gut their own regulations. It's the same pattern. It's the same pattern every single time. More power for the strong, more pain for the vulnerable, more protection for insiders, and more excuses for lawlessness. Enough is enough. Mr. Speaker, I'm voting no on this rule and no on this underlying package and no on all these bills, and I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I enjoyed the passionate speech from the gentleman from Massachusetts, but I wonder aloud if the gentleman has such passion for some of the criminals who our federal law enforcement have apprehended in Minnesota during their most recent operations. For instance, our federal law enforcement arrested a criminal illegal alien from Somalia with a record of multiple counts of credit card fraud, drug possession, controlled substance possession, and drug trafficking. By the way, this criminal was issued a final order of removal in 2022. Of course, that never was enacted under the previous administration, but I wonder if the gentleman has as much passion about that illegal alien that has committed many, many crimes. A criminal alien from Laos was also apprehended with 3 prior convictions for selling drugs, as well as convictions for assault and contributing to a minor's delinquency. The criminal was issued a final order of removal in 2009, but here we are. Likewise, the law enforcement in Minnesota arrested a criminal illegal alien from Mexico, previously arrested for child cruelty and battery. I wonder if the gentleman stands with that criminal illegal alien as well, and we'll surely see in further debate. But in the meantime, I yield 5 minutes to the gentlelady from North Carolina, the distinguished Rules Committee Chairwoman, Chairwoman Fox.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague from Georgia for yielding. Mr. Speaker, yesterday at the Rules Committee, I offered my sentiments as to why we must pass all the underlying measures that are being considered under this rule. For our rule debate here today, I'll touch upon the appropriations measure that's under consideration. So that the record is crystal clear, not once did the People's House court a government shutdown during the appropriations process. The various subcommittees of the Appropriations Committee did their jobs. They worked collaboratively to deliver to the full House their recommendations. As Chairman Cole said more than once in the Rules Committee, these appropriators knew their subject matter better than anyone else and presented to the rest of us their best effort. Then the House did its job. We've passed all 12 appropriations bills and sent them to the Senate, which had negotiated with their House counterparts and agreed to take what had been produced in the House. In doing so, we plowed a path toward regular order that was sorely overdue. Unfortunately, the Senate reneged on the agreement. The Senate did not pass what it had agreed to pass, and instead made a change after the House completed its work. That delay on the part of the Senate caused the government to shut down. Now, what the Senate should have done was approve the 6-bill appropriations package that was negotiated in good faith. This process should have been over and done with by now. We don't have time to be playing games, Mr. Speaker. Now, I wholeheartedly echo the sentiment offered by Chairman Cole that doing the right thing for the American people is something that does not get old. Congress holds an explicit mandate that's outlined in our Article 1 responsibilities to appropriate funding for the missions of departments across the government. When we fail to uphold that mandate, we fail to serve the American people. We fail to do right by them. We must bring the appropriations process to a close. We must move forward and complete more work in service to the American people. I support the rule and the underlying measures, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back to the gentleman from Georgia.
Gentlelady yields. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we reserve. Thank you.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I want to respond to the gentleman from Georgia who comes down here with the same old tired MAGA talking points when it comes to ICE and Homeland Security. He comes down here to confuse people, to somehow imply that Democrats don't want to lock up violent criminals. On the contrary, we do. And that's what we were promised, that the worst of the worst would be pursued and would be held accountable. But that's not what's happening. That is not what is happening. In Minnesota, ICE agents have been intimidating people at hospitals, forcing hospital management to issue protocols for employees on how to best engage. Our doctors and nurses ought to be focused on tending to patients and not dealing with ICE agents. It's despicable. I mean, agents showed up to a Minnesota hospital with a man who immigrated here legally. Just 4 hours after his arrest, he had at least 8 skull fractures, 8, in addition to life-threatening brain hemorrhages. And when people have exercised their First Amendment rights to protest, ICE meets them with only more abuse, beating peaceful protesters and dousing them in pepper spray. And Mr. Speaker, we have all heard by now the horrifying story of Alex Preddy, an innocent American citizen, an intensive care nurse who was brutally murdered by federal agents. This wasn't an isolated incident. The administration has shot 13 people during immigration enforcement operations since September. And I'm going to say again, 13 people have been shot by the Department of Homeland Security. 4 of those shootings were fatal. That's 4 people who would be with us today if not for the insane administration's cruel oppression of our communities. I mean, ICE agents are not protecting our borders. They're ambushing our communities, decimating our families, and taking innocent lives. Mr. Speaker, Republicans nearly tripled ICE's budget last summer with their big, ugly bill. And all that money ought to be clawed back. And as far as the appropriations package before us, again, I refuse to send another cent to Stephen Miller or Kristi Noem. She ought to be impeached, and he ought to be fired immediately. They are undermining our Constitution, and the department that they run is murdering American citizens on the street. We are hearing about young children being kidnapped. We are hearing about off-duty police officers being detained by ICE. We are hearing about ICE going after people because of the color of their skin. I mean, that is what we object to. Yeah, let's go after the criminals. By the way, we're not the party that pardoned all the insurrectionists on January 6th and said that, slate is clean. By the way, those people went on to go on to murder innocent people, to rape women, and to molest children. So there is a difference here. We want to go after the violent criminals, those who have committed terrible crimes. That's what we were promised, and we were lied to. And so we've had it. I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It sure seems like the gentleman from Massachusetts is using a whole set of left-wing talking points himself, but I am curious, and rather we should probably check the transcript. I do appreciate the gentleman from Massachusetts for applauding federal law enforcement's efforts to apprehend and prosecute and subject to our system of justice some of the worst criminals in our country. So I do appreciate that sentiment, but with that I will yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, who I may add is a champion debater, so I wish my colleagues on the other side of the aisle best wishes.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my good friend, Representative, for asking me to do that. I think you've raised the expectations here, so we'll see what I can do. I've been in Congress now for 10 months, and this is the second time the government has been shut down. And what is similar in them both is the reason. Because Democrats have put the priorities of illegal immigrants over the priorities of the people that we swore an oath to protect. That is, the American citizens. A few months ago, the shutdown was to try to give illegal immigrants free health care. And now the shutdown is simply over whether they should go home. What we're dealing with is a fetishization of illegal immigrants that I simply can't understand. Sometimes I think it's delusion, that they live in a world of sunshine and rainbows and pixie dust and unicorns, where anyone who wants should be able to come to the United States, that everyone is good, that no one causes a problem, that they can get all the free stuff they want, they can vote in our elections, and everything will work out just fine. But that's not how it works. We hear a lot about the 2 Americans who were killed. And it is unfortunate that that happened. But what I would note is if they had been staying away from law enforcement while law enforcement was doing their job, which is to round up and send home people who are in our country illegally, who have been told to leave and refuse to do so, nothing would have happened to them. But you know who they don't talk about? The estimated 500 Americans that are killed each year by an illegal immigrant. Why do we not know their names? What about their families? Those 500 people, that's 500 families whose lives are destroyed, 500 spouses and mothers and fathers and children who are dead because of someone who should not have even been here. That's who I swore an oath to protect. But let's make no mistake what this is about. Democrats do not care about illegal immigrants. They don't care at all. What this is about is political power. That is what this is about. Because the states that they run, real Americans, actual Americans, people who should be able to vote in our country, are fleeing in droves. U-Haul businesses going through the roof in places like New York and California. And they're moving to my state of Florida. And as Americans leave these horribly run states that do not cooperate with law enforcement, where they release these criminals out onto the streets, the only way they can retain power is to import illegal immigrants to try to hold on to their seats in this House, to try to hold on to their federal funding, and to try to hold on to their elections. That is what this debate is about. So I believe that we need to move forward today, because all this vote is right now is a vote on whether to discuss and vote on whether to reopen the government. Now, I will be honest, there are things in the underlying appropriations bills that make my stomach churn. But I believe we have an obligation to the American people to have that debate and to have that vote. And to vote against the rule means you do not believe the American people should even have the possibility of having that government reopened again. I came here to fight to make sure there are not another 500 families next year, and 500 the year after, and 500 the year after. We need to get the government reopened. We need to get our folks back to work, and we need to be focused not on illegal immigrants, not on people who shouldn't be here, but those who should and have the right to be and have the right to be safe. That's why I'll be voting for the rule today, and I hope all of my colleagues do as well. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, the Florida man who just spoke characterized the murder of 2 Americans by ICE agents as unfortunate. It's not unfortunate. It's goddamn unacceptable. And everybody should be outraged by that. And he also bragged about the fact that he's been in Congress for 10 months and the government has been shut down twice. I hate to be the one to remind the gentleman, but the last time I checked, his party is in control of everything. The White House, the Senate, and the House. You run the show. So maybe November will be a month of reckoning. Let's hope so, for the sake of this country. Mr. Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to make an order, amendment number 47, to Senate amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 7148, which would allow for an up or down vote on whether to cut the $75 billion Republicans gave ICE in their big ugly bill and use those funds to undo some of the big ugly bill's disastrous health care cuts. Mr. Speaker, last year Republicans voted to kick more than 15 million people off their health care. 15 million Americans. they chose to kick off health care through an over $1 trillion cut to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. Republicans claimed that this was for deficit reduction, but we know that wasn't true. That was a lie. According to the nonpartisan budget experts at the Congressional Budget Office, their big, ugly bill added $4 trillion to the national debt, in part by giving ICE boatloads of cash to run roughshod through American cities with zero safeguards. This must end. If Democrats defeat the previous question, we will offer an amendment to repurpose these ICE funds toward lowering health care costs, which Republican Senators Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins voted for just last week. So I challenge my Republican colleagues in this body to do the same. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment into the record along with any extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question. And to discuss our proposal, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Rhode Island, the sponsor of this amendment, Mr. Amo.
Without objection, gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Ranking Member McGovern. Republicans are trying yet again to write a blank check for ICE while American families struggle to afford the basics. If we defeat the previous question, we can claw back the $75 billion in the ICE slush fund that Trump and Republicans established with their big ugly law and redirect that money to where it belongs, lowering health care costs. Because in that same bill, Republicans cut more than $1 trillion from our health care system, jeopardizing millions of Americans. Reclaiming this $75 billion from ICE would prevent 700,000 Americans from losing their health insurance. That's 700,000 Americans protected. That's 700,000 Americans being spared from choosing between seeing a doctor or paying rent or paying for their groceries. This is a simple question of our values. Taxpayer dollars should be used to care for people, not to fund mass agents terrorizing our communities, spreading panic, making us less safe, and killing people. Instead of lowering costs, Republicans poured billions into DHS, an agency spreading chaos and making choices with deadly consequences, all while ignoring the needs of working families. That tells you what their priorities are. But everyone in this chamber has a chance to decide today. Do you want to lower costs and protect 700,000 Americans receiving Medicaid? Or fund Trump's domestic masked army of terror? It's that simple. And here's the kicker. This effort was bipartisan in the Senate when Senator Sanders introduced it. Democrats and Republicans agreed that we should cut the ICE slush fund to protect Medicaid. It should be bipartisan here, too. I hope Republicans make the right choice, but my expectations are pretty low. I hope the American people are listening. They're most certainly watching on their screens every night. This vote is about using taxpayer dollars to lower costs for Americans over fueling the fear that persists in our cities. It's about caring for our neighbors when they're sick over sending masked agents to terrorize our communities. It really is that simple. Choose care over cruelty. I urge a no vote and yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I hope in the spirit of respectful discourse, the gentleman from Massachusetts maintains standards of decorum on the floor and no longer takes the Lord's name in vain. But since he did invoke the gentleman from Florida with respect to procedure and as it relates to our ability to actually run the show, to use his words, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Representative Fine.
Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Representative Jack. I would just point out we don't run the show. I wish we did. And perhaps the gentleman from Massachusetts wants to work with me to encourage the Senate to get rid of the filibuster. Because we have to tell the truth in this process. And if we could pass this budget with 51 votes and we didn't, then that point would be valid and that criticism would be just. But we don't have 60 votes in the Senate. We are reliant on Democrats to join us in order to get it over the finish line. Now, a deal was cut, apparently, where we made a deal that we said we'll pass all of these bills as one package, and Republicans voted for things they didn't like because allegedly Democrats in the Senate would go along at the end. But as sometimes happens, people don't keep their word. And so that package that was negotiated, that was agreed upon, that was a compromise between all parties failed to pass. But what we must agree upon, what we must stay, and what is absolutely true, is that we don't control the show in the Senate. Last thing I would say is this. It was brought up that how I spoke about those tragedies in Minnesota. And I did. But we need to be careful, because when we talk about people being murdered in Minnesota because they were lawfully carrying a gun using their Second Amendment rights, we are belying decades of concealed carry classes that tell people who are carrying guns how they should behave around law enforcement. Now, I know Democrats generally hate guns, and probably none of them carry concealed. But as someone who does and who has many friends who do, you're told not to confront physically law enforcement when you're carrying that gun, which is exactly what happened here. Now, do I wish he hadn't died? I absolutely do. But we have to be careful, because we don't want more of that to happen. And when we say he did nothing wrong, we're setting the stage for more of that to happen. These words matter. We have to tell the truth, whether it's the deaths of Preddy and Good, or whether Republicans actually control the show in the Senate. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Georgia.
We reserve.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Boy, Mr. Speaker, I'm confused. I mean, the gentleman wants to say that the Republicans are not in control, even though they control the White House, the House, and the Senate. But yet the Republicans were in control to throw 15 million people off of health care. The Republicans were in control to add $4 trillion to the debt. The Republicans are in control to cut Medicaid by $1 trillion. The Republicans are in control to give ICE, unlimited amounts of money with no guardrails. So, I mean, and now they're telling us they're not in control? I mean, I'm confused. Let me just say this. You can't have it both ways. And again, I hope that the Republican control of this House and of this Senate is short-lived, because, quite frankly, this country cannot stand another 2 years of this. Where if you're rich and you're well-connected and you're a friend of the president, you get all kinds of sweetheart deals. But if you're not, if you're a hard-working, middle-class family, you get screwed. People have had it. People have had it. They see through this. But to say that you're not in control when you've been cutting programs that have helped poor children, that have helped middle-class families, when you've given tax breaks to multi-millionaires and billionaires, give me a break. Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Mississippi, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Homeland Security, Mr. Thompson.
Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the time from the gentleman from Massachusetts. Mr. Speaker, Congress must not give ICE or CBP another dollar while they are killing Americans in our streets. We must protect our communities by demanding real change first. This is what our constituents elected us to do. As a starting point, the federal occupation of Minneapolis must end immediately. ICE must adhere to the Constitution and use only judicial warrants for its enforcement operation. Instead, just last week, ICE directed its officers to conduct more arrests without any warrants at all. DHS law enforcement officers must clearly be identifiable and prohibited from hiding behind masks. Racial profiling in immigration enforcement must stop. Sensitive locations like schools, daycare, hospitals, and churches must be protected. We must rein in the sweeping surveillance system DHS is using to crack down on Americans. CBP personnel must also go back to the border. The federal government must cooperate with state and local investigators in investigations, including the murders of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. I've been an elected official, Mr. Speaker, like you have, in the state of Mississippi. Never have I seen an opportunity where federal, state, and local law enforcement didn't cooperate together on finding criminals. ICE has taken this to another level, and we're a better country than this. And Mr. Speaker, Kristi Noem must go. She has endangered the security of the United States, its people, and our institution of government. Again, vote no on the rule and the underlying bill so we can hold the Trump administration accountable. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Georgia.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's important to remember that we stand in the midst of the second government shutdown. And I just have a question for the gentlemen from Massachusetts and Mississippi. Because we are in a shutdown today, and this vote is a vote that will help us end this shutdown later this afternoon, I'm curious, for how long are you prepared to block our military members from receiving not just their salary, but also the hard-earned pay raise? For how long are you willing to withhold the dues that are owed to the people that protect us? And I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I thought the gentleman was asking me a question, but we would have a conversation. I will tell you, we don't want to shut down. We want you to reel in an out-of-control ICE agency that are killing American citizens right before our very eyes. That's what we want. And I don't understand for the life of me why that's such a heavy lift for my Republican friends. But that's what we're asking for. We don't want to shut the government down. We don't, that's not who we are. By the way, again, Republicans are responsible for the last shutdown. You went on vacation rather than stay in Washington to try to negotiate a deal. But here we are. All we're asking for is let's reel in this out-of-control agencies, and and my friends find that too difficult to comprehend. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Frankel.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I support the 5 bills that received bipartisan support, but I cannot vote for a package that includes funding for the Department of Homeland Security without immediate action to stop the ongoing violation of human rights and law by ICE that have turned into thugs and has turned our country, America, into a place that many of us don't recognize. Donald Trump promised to take violent criminals off the street, but instead, his immigration enforcement has become a campaign of cruelty against peaceful people, tearing families apart, hollowing out businesses, and paralyzing neighborhoods with pepper spray and fear. And the crisis is national in scope, not just the headlines of the cold-blooded murders in Minnesota. The Department of Homeland Security has detained hundreds of thousands of decent people this year, often in unspeakable conditions and without a fair process. And that includes over 10,000 people in my home state of Florida. A mother nursing her baby torn away from her child. Largely good, decent mothers and fathers, workers who contribute to our communities. And yeah, we do need to take the time for bipartisan immigration reform. But today, we must rein in ICE. And that includes ending mass enforcement, roving patrols, requiring judicial warrants, mandating body cameras, ending total immunity, and repurposing the billions of dollars that are being used to menace our communities. Security does not require brutality. Enforcement does not require lawlessness. And our immigration policy should reflect our values, not force us to abandon them. We can secure our borders without terrorizing our neighbors, and I will not support funding that enables cruelty. Congress must act now. Impeach Kristi Noem and rein in ICE. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Gentleman reserves.
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, I think it's important to note the reason why we're here today is because Senate Democrats, along with some Senate Republicans, advanced legislation that enables us to fund the government. So I do find it interesting that our colleagues in the House here are so adamantly opposed to funding our government when 20 of their colleagues in the Senate, in their own party, not only support giving our troops a pay raise, but support paying and funding our government as it rightfully should be because of all the wins that President Trump has accomplished thus far. But I am curious, Mr. Speaker, with respect to this vote today, I hear over and over again commentary on ICE and operations therein, but again, no one has addressed the fact that today we are voting to pay our service members. It's a very simple vote. You can either vote yes to pay them or no to withhold payment and funds to them, and I'm just waiting for somebody to answer why that seems to be a bargaining chip that some of our colleagues on the Democrat side of the aisle continue to deploy at the expense of our service members. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, I would just say to the gentleman, unfortunately, under the Republican rule, we don't have regular order anymore. We should be debating appropriation bills one at a time. They bunch everything together. And by the way, not only do they bunch things together, they don't even call for amendments anymore. This is the most closed Congress in history. This is the Rules Committee, and this House of Representatives has become a place where democracy goes to die. My friend should be ashamed of what they are doing to this institution. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Fletcher.
Gentlewoman is recognized from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, in the nearly 2 weeks since the House last met, people across America witnessed the execution of another American citizen, Alex Preddy, by agents of the United States government, Border Patrol agents operating far from the border in Minneapolis. People across the country watched in horror as federal agents executed him and then immediately tried to assassinate his character, lying about who he is and what he was doing. The American people see through these lies, just as they see that this administration is taking actions every single day against its own people that are unconstitutional, un-American, and unconscionable. Everywhere, people are talking about it. In our House Democratic Caucus, we're talking about what we can do about it. The only place that we're not talking about it is here, in this chamber, on the floor of the United States House of Representatives. As Mr. McGovern just noted, once again, the Republicans that control what comes to the floor blocked any amendments to the bill, stopping not just the policy proposed, but the policy debate about the potential solutions and the problems that they address altogether. And now they say we'll address them in 2 weeks. Mr. Speaker, we don't need 2 weeks. We don't have 2 weeks. When Americans are being killed, detained, harassed, and silenced by their government, there should be no higher priority for the U.S. House of Representatives than for the entire Congress than protecting the people that we represent and protecting the Constitution that gives us all of our rights. It is being violated daily by this administration and by officials who have sworn an oath to protect it, just as we have as members of Congress. But we are not doing that here today, and that's why I'm voting no on this rule and urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Gentleman from Georgia.
Well, Mr. Speaker, our Democrat colleagues have tried to distract from the historic achievements reached in 2025 by mischaracterizing the work of the House Committee on Rules with weaponized statistics taken out of context. I would like to remind my colleagues that barely over a third, or 37%, of rules this Congress have been closed at the discretion of the Committee on Rules, meaning for the vast majority of closed rules, there were not any amendments that could even be made in order. My friends all across the aisle, particularly my friend from Massachusetts, all too well knows the often Herculean tasks required of the Rules Committee and the difficult discussions when deliberating amendment decisions. The Rules majority believes in meaningful lawmaking, not partisan messaging exercises. We do not need to come up with partisan messaging amendments at the last minute in order to scare, or rather score, political points or manufacture floor fights, but instead focus on advancing thoughtful, substantive legislation like the measures before us today through a fair and transparent process. And I also want to note, as I understand it, under my Democrat colleagues' stewardship of the Committee on Rules, he mentions abolishing tradition or what have you. Well, I think it's helpful to note, Mr. Speaker, that under his leadership of the Committee on Rules, they abolished the centuries-old tradition of the motion to recommit with instructions. I think we would all benefit from an explanation of abolishing that centuries-old tradition and a right of the minority. I reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, a lot of words to justify the most closed Congress in history. 83% of the rules have been closed. 8 out of 10. You don't even call for amendments anymore. And people know that it's a waste of time to come to the Rules Committee because you already tipped them off. There are going to be no amendments in order. And 90% of Democratic amendments have been rejected. You know, and a big chunk of Republican amendments have been rejected. I'm sorry that your rank and file are such cheap dates when it comes to legislating, but they cave all the time and they vote for these crappy rules that are totally closed. So that's a bunch of bullshit. Let's be honest. That's what we're talking about here. That is just not, that's not an accurate assessment of what is going on here. I mean, this is the most closed Congress in history. You should be ashamed. I reserve.
I want to remind members about using profanity during debate. Gentleman's recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. First and foremost, I think when your arguments are hollow, that's when you revert to foul language, and I think that's evident as we've seen today. But again, I asked the question, Mr. Speaker, to the American people, and I hope that they demand an answer. Under the gentleman from Massachusetts stewardship of the Committee on Rules, they abolished a centuries-old tradition during the 117th Congress. I think we would all welcome, we are debating, in fact, procedure today. I think we would all welcome an explanation of that horrific abolishment of committee procedure. I reserve.
Reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, and Mr. Speaker, I just want to remind my Republican friends who just kind of go along to get along. I mean, Mr. Arrington, who's a chairman, 71% of his amendments have been blocked. I mean, you know, I could write down the list. Congresswoman Mace, 76% of her amendments have been. Stubbe, 79% have been blocked. I go right down the list. These are all Republicans who just routinely get blocked. So, I mean, enough. This is a ridiculous argument. The bottom line is a lot of words to justify the most closed Congress in history, and I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Georgia.
We reserve.
Gentleman reserves.
May I ask the gentleman how many more speakers he has on his side? Hold on. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Ledger.
Gentlelady from New Mexico, got 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak up against Kristi Noem's Department of Homeland Security. And speaking up is what we must do when we see that the Constitution is violated and the moral fabric of our nation is brutalized the same way they are brutalizing our communities and killing our citizens. Whether it's in New Mexico or Minnesota, fear has become a policy for ICE and CBP, and cruelty has become their strategy as they take money that is taxpayer money that could be used for affordable housing, for health care, for bringing down the cost of living, and they are spending it to terrorize our community. Following the Constitution, respecting the First, Fourth, and 14th Amendment should not be optional. It should never be up for a negotiation. We should make it a requirement and make sure that they do not have immunity, because then they act with impunity. And we should not give another penny to the Department of Homeland Security until we get accountability. And with that, I urge that we vote against this rule, and I yield back.
Massachusetts.
I reserve.
You reserve?
We're
Gentleman from Georgia.
We're prepared to close.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I yield myself the remaining time, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, listening to the debate by my Republican colleagues, I know Republicans want to pretend like they're not in control, because that absolves them of responsibility and accountability. They don't want to own their own record because they know their record sucks. They want to pretend like they're not in control because then they'll be because if they pretend like they're in control, if they acknowledge that they're in control, then they'll be held accountable in November. Now look what they've promised and compare it to what they've done so far. Tax breaks for billionaires. They make sure their big donors are taken care of while they screw over regular people. $40 billion to Argentina, hurting our farmers and ranchers, importing more beef from South America, bombing Venezuela, threatening to invade NATO allies. Meanwhile, prices are not down, prices are up because of their stupid tariffs and lousy economic policies. They promised to release all the Epstein files. They still haven't done that. In fact, they're covering up for the President of the United States. And people are struggling more than ever because Trump's economy sucks. They are making it easier for the elites, easier for the billionaires, easier for the Epstein class, and harder for everybody else. Maybe that's why even Republicans are finally acknowledging MAGA was all a lie. Of course, their members only acknowledge that after they leave. But let's listen to Trump's former top ally, Marjorie Taylor Greene. And here's what she said, and I quote, "I think people are realizing it was all a lie. It was a big lie for the people. What MAGA is really serving in this administration, who they're serving is their big donors, end quote. Look at who Republicans have helped. They have been in charge for a year. They've helped big oil. They've helped big banks. They've helped big tech. Look who was in the front row at Trump's inauguration. Billionaires. That's all he cares about. And look at their promises to go after, quote, the worst of the worst when it comes to immigration. Another broken promise. Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem are not going after the worst of the worst. They're going after kids, VA nurses. They're deporting veterans, for God's sake. And so we are sick and tired of the broken promises and the lies. Enough. I talk to Republican colleagues all the time who privately confess to me that this is a disaster. And then they come on the floor and then they talk to the press and say everything is beautiful. That's just not reality. This president and this administration is taking this country in the wrong direction. We have people that are being murdered in our streets by U.S. federal agents. When is enough going to be enough? I mean, I can't believe this. Go along to get along. I get it. Everybody over there is afraid of the guy in the White House. But maybe you should be more afraid of your constituents. Maybe you ought to listen to your constituents because they're sick and tired of this BS. They've had it. They want Congress to be a body that fights for them, that fights to improve the quality of life for average people. They want this body to be a place where we debate important issues passionately and we skip all the crazy debates we have on trivial matters. We can do so much better. We can do so much better. But it requires, my friends on the other side of the aisle, to kind of grow a spine, to stand up and to say and do the right thing. This is nuts what's happening. People being murdered in our streets, federal agents crashing into people's homes without a judicial warrant, former off-duty police officers being detained by ICE. I mean, you know, people with brown and black skin being detained routinely by ICE. This has to stop. And Mr. Speaker, I urge all my colleagues to vote no on this rule. Let's get to the negotiating table. Let's do something to reel in this out-of-control agency. But going along to get along is no longer an option. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd first say that screaming doesn't make up for substance. But in closing, the rule I presented today, House Resolution 1032, enables the House of Representatives to carry out its responsibilities and to govern in an orderly and fair manner for the American people. And as a reminder, a yes vote on this rule enables us to consider legislation that ends the Democrats' second government shutdown and ensures that our government remains fully open. It ensures that our soldiers, our sailors, our Marines, our airmen, and our guardians are paid on time and receive the pay raise they so rightfully deserve. A yes vote on this rule enables us to consider legislation that protects working families, seniors, and small businesses in the District of Columbia by allowing the House to address actions that deny them the benefits of historic tax relief enacted by Congress. A yes vote on this rule enables us to consider legislation that strengthens America's economic and national security by advancing domestic mineral production, something we didn't talk about enough today, which reduces our reliance on foreign sources and supports job creation here at home. And finally, a yes vote on this rule enables us to consider legislation that preserves equal debate, protects the rights of the minority, and allows members on both sides of the aisle to fully participate in the legislative process. Mr. Speaker, this rule allows the House of Representatives to govern and to deliver on the responsibilities entrusted to us. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this rule. Mr. Speaker, I hope those watching enjoyed our lively debate with the gentleman from Massachusetts and his colleagues. Although for any families watching, I hope they edited out the gentleman's foul language and taking the name of the Lord in vain. But let's see which arguments prevail because we're about to vote. So, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
Gentleman yields. The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman is recognized.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
Gentleman recognized. Ask for the yeas and nays. The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings of the question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess for a period of 15 minutes. Less than 15 minutes.
Vote, the yeas are 212 and the nays are 210. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker,
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
ask for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise, a sufficient number having risen. A recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 217 and the nays are 215. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 1032, I call up the bill H.R. 7148, the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2026, with the Senate amendments thereto, and I have a motion at the desk.
The clerk will report the title of the bill, designate the Senate amendments, and report the motion.
H.R. 7148, an act making further consolidated appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2026, and for other purposes. Senate amendments. Mr. Cole of Oklahoma moves to concur in the Senate amendments to H.R. 7148.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1032, the motion shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their respective designees. The gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole, and the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the measure under consideration.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time that I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The House has done a tremendous job these last few months as we finalized true bipartisan bicameral bills to fully fund our government in a member-driven, district-focused way. 6 of those bills have been signed into law by President Trump, fully funding those departments and agencies through the end of the fiscal year. While the remaining 6 bills have all passed the House, we're dealing with a partial government shutdown that could have and should have been avoided. Funding the government is not an optional exercise. It's the most basic duty we have in Congress. 2 weeks ago, the House and the Senate struck a bipartisan and bicameral deal to move forward on these remaining appropriations bills for fiscal year 2026. The House acted expeditiously to pass these bills, marking historic progress for our appropriations process and the return to regular order that every member of this chamber wants to see. I share the frustrations of many that the Senate altered our deal at the last minute. But our obligation is not to these emotions, it's to the American people. While we all worked hard, especially our Cardinals, to ensure that all 12 bills would be signed into law before the January 30th deadline, the Senate has put us on a different path. The best choice before us is to pass these 5 bills and the short-term stopgap for the Department of Homeland Security. This approach delivers full-year funding to more than 95% of the government and avoids the consequence of inaction. To continue the government shutdown would be to repeat all the same mistakes my friends across the aisle made in October of last year, throwing federal employees into chaos and confusion while they are forced to work without pay, wreaking havoc on our airports while TSA and FFA are unfunded, putting undue stress on our military families, and causing further instability to the United States economy. Shutdowns are never the answer. They don't work. They only hurt the American people. So today, lawmakers in this chamber have an opportunity to avoid repeating past mistakes. I encourage everyone on both sides of the aisle to do the right thing and close out 5 of our remaining 6 appropriations bills for FY 2026 while enacting funding for core priorities, including strengthening America's defense and providing a well-earned pay raise to our troops, advancing life-saving biomedical research and critical education programs, enhancing the safety and reliability of our skies and infrastructure, supporting small businesses and strengthening cybersecurity, restoring American deterrence on the world stage, and reinforcing economic and community strength across the country. The package also includes a 2-week continuing resolution for our 6th and final bill, the Department of Homeland Security, which will give the White House additional time for negotiations. President Trump is leading by example and engaging directly with Democrats in good faith conversations on that front. He's also been explicitly clear that holding the government hostage is wrong. I wholeheartedly agree with him. As he stated just yesterday, and I quote, "We need to get the government open, and I hope all Republicans and Democrats will join me in supporting this bill and send it to my desk without delay." So I say to this chamber, let's get it done. The American people deserve stability, and they expect results. These bills deliver both. For anyone consulting their conscience, these measures have already passed the House with strong bipartisan support. The work has been carried out, and the responsibility now is to get it across the finish line. This vote is about governing responsibly and doing our jobs. I look forward to us nearing the completion of our FY 26 duties, and I urge all members to support this bipartisan package. Madam Speaker, with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
There are 2 paths before us today. One, if this bill passes, another, if it fails. If we take the first path, if the bill passes, here is what will happen. The Departments of Defense, Labor, Health and Human Services and Education, State, Treasury, Transportation, and Housing and Urban Development will be fully funded through the end of September. The Democratic wins we secured in this bill will be locked in. We will reject $163 billion in cuts to public services proposed by President Trump. We will increase funding for the National Institutes of Health Biomedical Research by $415 million, and we will provide over $66 billion for rental assistance programs. We turned back in the labor HHS bill 47 programs that the administration had slotted for elimination. In the housing, transportation and housing urban development, 24 programs were slotted for elimination. We reversed that. We will increase funding for child care and Head Start by $170 million, secure an additional $5.5 billion for humanitarian assistance, and boost funding for federal public defenders by $315 million. We will establish meaningful constraints on the Trump administration's ability to abuse the budget process, take expansive power over federal funding, federal spending away from Russ Vote, and reclaim it for the Congress. If not, the President and Russ Vote will be in charge of the funds and we will have no say. At the same time, funding for the Department of Homeland Security will continue at its current level for 10 days. And my friends, it's important to note that it is about 6 legislative days. If we do not pass another bill by next Friday, the department will shut down. Having passed the other full-year funding bills today, every other department would remain open. If we are not satisfied with where we are in those 10 days, 6 legislative days, we can withhold our votes without jeopardizing all of the important democratic priorities I just laid out and more. We will be in the strongest possible position to fight for and win the drastic changes we all know are needed to protect our communities. Judicial warrant requirements, no more detentions or deportations of United States citizens, an enforceable code of conduct, taking off the masks, putting the badges on, requiring the body cameras, real accountability for the egregious abuses we have seen. If we choose the second path, however, if this bill does not pass, none of that happens. Instead, we enter a prolonged government shutdown. Workers across the board, workers across broad swaths of the federal government would be furloughed, public services would be scaled back, paychecks would be missed. My Republican colleagues will only talk about those not getting paychecks, and you can hear it already. Instead of my Republican colleagues having to defend the Department of Homeland Security with what is happening across the country, lawless, reckless, out-of-control agencies marauding over our cities and towns and striking people where they work and where they live. Instead of increasing funding for the National Institutes of Health, new research grants would be frozen, interrupting efforts to treat and prevent deadly diseases. Instead of providing funding for rental assistance, payments would be delayed, and families would face the prospect of eviction. Instead of increasing funding for Head Start, Health and Human Services would be unable to issue new grants, jeopardizing access to early education for countless children across this country. Instead of reclaiming Congress's power of the purse, we would concede even more discretion to Russ Vote and the White House to abuse the budget process for their own partisan gain, which they would certainly exploit, as we have seen. And in 10 days, 6 legislative days, we would be in the same place with regard to Homeland Security that we would have been had the bill passed, except we will have lost all of the democratic priorities I have laid out. I have no illusions about ICE and for CBP. We must rein in these rogue agencies. We need to protect our communities. We need to protect the people and the children in our communities. We must have accountability for the egregious abuses we have seen. And it's understandable the rage and the fear and the outrageousness of what these activities have been all over this country. The only way we can get these things is to fight for and win them and let the public know what we are fighting for. Passing these 5 full-year funding bills today puts us in the best position to win that fight over the next 10 days, the 6 legislative days, and beyond, if need be. I strongly encourage my colleagues to support this bill today and continue to fight to protect our communities in the coming weeks. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from Connecticut reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished chairman of the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee, my very good friend, the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Womack.
For how much time is the gentleman? 3 minutes. The
3
gentleman
minutes.
from Arkansas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the consolidated appropriations package before the House today. Passage of this legislation means that Congress will have provided full-year funding to more than 90% of the federal government. And it marks an important departure from the unfortunate norm in which Congress too often fails to meet its Article I responsibility. There are many highlights worth noting in this package. In providing for the common defense, the legislation strategically increases funding to ensure that our military continues to be the most lethal in the world, while also ensuring that our allies have the tools they need to help us defend democracy. The package also makes investments in biomedical research and small business development. Together, these measures and more support a more prosperous America. Madam Speaker, I chair the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee. My division of this legislation cuts back unfocused spending and reduces bureaucratic bloat. Before I get into specifics, let me just thank my subcommittee ranking member, Jim Clyburn, for his partnership. He's been a great friend, and he's been an invaluable asset and partner through this process, and I appreciate his dedication to crafting this division of the bill and advancing the entire package. The THUD division invests in what matters to the American people: economic growth, safe and efficient mobility, and housing affordability. We prioritize safety by allocating over $22 billion for the Federal Aviation Administration. These dollars will fully fund air traffic control operations and enable the hiring of 2,500 new controllers. It'll jumpstart the modernization of outdated facilities and equipment, strengthening the safety and reliability of our national airspace system. We provide more than $64 billion for highways, taking care to send the overwhelming majority of these dollars back to the states, because it's at the state level where the best decisions are made, not here in Washington. We also provide funding to address our nation's shortage of safe and available truck parking. America's truckers work tirelessly to keep our grocery stores stocked, our packages delivered, and our supply chains moving. Ensuring they have a safe place to park between long drives is common sense, and this bill delivers on that promise. At the same time, we preserve housing assistance for the most vulnerable, such as youth aging out of our nation's foster care system, while promoting affordability through flexible, locally driven programs that allow communities to expand housing supply without the micromanagement of the federal government. It does all these things while saving millions of hard-earned American taxpayer dollars. I want to thank my subcommittee staff, Avery, Andrew, Doug, Mary Beth. Your hard work and diligence has been indispensable throughout this process, and know that I'm deeply grateful to have each one of you on my team.
An additional 30 seconds, Madam Speaker.
So I'm going to take that 30 seconds and brag on this guy right here, Tom Cole. He has re-engineered, somewhat reinvented, a lost appropriations process, and I am eternally grateful, and I know I speak for the American people in thanking Mr. Cole for his leadership. I want to thank my colleagues for this bipartisanship that's been exhibited by this package. And a yes vote today takes us one step closer to restoring the confidence that the American people should have in this Congress. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, the distinguished ranking member of the Financial Services and General Government Subcommittee, Mr. Hoyer.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee for yielding, and I thank the Speaker. There are 5 of these bills who are not controversial, or I suppose which are not controversial. I urge my colleagues to vote for them, to keep the government operating, to make sure that our federal employees come to work and do their job for the American people and get paid for it. There is one bill in this package that is very controversial. There is one bill in this package that the overwhelming majority of our side thinks should not be in the bill. But I remind my colleagues that bill is funded for the next 10 days or 6 legislative days. And during that period of time, we intend to raise very substantial concerns about the operations that are being carried out not only in Minneapolis but in other parts of our country by the Immigration, Customs, and Border Patrol agents. The Constitution calls upon us to establish justice and ensure domestic tranquility. Many of my colleagues, I know, believe that voting against this bill will make a strong statement about the conduct that we see being carried out by the agencies I just mentioned. Let me suggest to them we need to have focus on that issue, because the other 5 issues that we face, the 5 appropriation bills have yet to been signed by the President of the United States and will fund about 76% of the government, are things that we have agreed upon. After they pass, after they're signed by the President, there will be a lot of time to debate the operations of Homeland Security. And in my view, the laws that they are breaking, the Constitution that they are not respecting, and the human rights that they are undermining. There will be time for that debate. There will be time for that action. Today is a time to fund the majority of government for the American people. Minneapolis has shocked the conscience of America. We ought to be shocked, angry, and disgusted by the taking of life of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. We the people want to end this violent occupation of our cities. We the people deserve answers. The Congress needs to rein in the Department of Homeland Security. That's why I voted, and so many of my colleagues voted against funding the Department of Homeland Security. Not because we don't need Homeland Security, we do, but we need it done within the context of the Constitution and the laws of this country and of our states. This Congress needs to ensure the federal government can continue to provide vital services to the American people. Voting for this bill does that. And voting for this bill also gives us the opportunity to constrain 6 months, 6 days essentially of funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Unfortunately, out of the regular order, they're funded for the balance of the year in many recessions. So this compromise bill serves the interest of funding our government for the American people and giving us the opportunity to constrain and to ensure that there are meaningful, substantive, substantial reforms and restraints placed upon the operations of the Department of Homeland Security, as it must be. It is essential that we unmask Trump's federal immigration agents, force them to abide by the local law enforcement standards for use of force, and use warrants.
I yield the gentleman another minute.
The gentleman's recognized for 1 more minute.
Throughout this year's appropriations process, we have seen Donald Trump and Russell Vogt trample on this Congress's power of the purse. Some will admit that, some will say it silently. If there were ever a time for this Congress to exercise that power, it is now. So let us pass 5 bills on which we have agreement, substantially restrain and stop the funding of DHS a week from this Friday, and then come to an agreement on honoring the Constitution, the laws of this country, and the conduct of law enforcement. Let's pass this bill and then focus on that which the country wants us to focus on like a laser for them, for the people. I yield back my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Connecticut reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to my very good friend and the distinguished chairman of the Labor, Health and Human Services and Education Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Adderholt.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today, as my colleagues are, in support of FY26 appropriations package, which, as it's been said, provides the full year funds for 5 out of the remaining 6 appropriation bills. Unfortunately, funding these bills is not an optional thing. It's a part of our constitutional requirement, and we must act on our commitment to the American people. With this bill that is before us today, the government will continue operating effectively and provide stability for the American people. The path forward in this legislation reflects President Trump's negotiations and direction to avoid a long-term partial shutdown and keep the government operating without further disruptions. As chairman of the Labor, Health and Human Services and Education Related Agencies Subcommittee, I'm honored to work with the ranking member of this subcommittee, Ms. DeLauro, who also serves as ranking member of the full committee, in making sure that what we do in this legislation provide funding for critical projects that provide support and for jobs for local growth in our districts. The Labor, Health and Human Services bill on the floor today balances the need for responsible fiscal stewardship while maintaining key investments in biomedical research, schools, and in public health. Thanks to the negotiations on a bicameral, bipartisan level, funding decisions have moved through a deliberative, member-driven process that emphasizes transparency, accountability, as well as timely consideration. The Labor H bill before us demonstrates the will of the American people who want new priorities and accountability in government, including priorities to make America healthy again and make America skilled again. Investments in this bill are directed to where they matter most, into life-saving biomedical research and resilient medical supply chains, classrooms and training that prepare the next generation for success, and rural hospitals and primary care to end chronic disease epidemic. These measures are part of an agreement that keeps the FY26 spending levels below the spending that was projected under the current continuing resolution, which delivers real savings for the American taxpayers. Enactment and passage of a full-year appropriation is vital. In conclusion, I want to thank the staff on both sides of the majority and the minority for all their hard work in getting this bill across the finish line. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Once again, I urge my colleagues to support the underlying bill, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from South Carolina, the distinguished ranking member of the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee, Mr. Clyburn.
Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I thank the gentlelady for yielding me the time. Madam Chair, I rise as ranking member of the Transportation and Housing Appropriations Subcommittee in strong support of this bipartisan legislation, in large measure because it freezes funding for the Department of Homeland Security at its current level, while allowing for several days, 10 to be exact, for us to continue to zero in on that segment of the legislation and hopefully reach a bipartisan agreement. But we have already reached bipartisan agreements on 5 other sections. And one of those in this bill includes $113 billion in discretionary spending for transportation and housing programs and reflects a renewed commitment to addressing the affordability crisis and improving the safety of our transportation systems. For housing, the bill prevents the eviction of more than 4 million low-income households served through HUD's rental assistance programs, including those currently served by Section 8 and public housing. The bill reinforces efforts to combat homelessness by increasing funding for homeless assistance grants by $366 million. It protects investments for mayors and governors by providing $3.3 billion for the popular Community Development Block Grants Program. And it includes $58 million for housing counseling assistance for renters and first-time homebuyers, and $8 million to continue legal aid for eviction assistance. For transportation, the bill invests in the safety of the flying public by increasing FAA operations by nearly $230 million, enabling the hiring of 2,500 new air traffic controllers. It increases funding for the air traffic control towers and facilities by 26% above fiscal year 2025. The bill also protects investments for continuing Amtrak service along the Northeast Corridor and National Network by providing $2.4 billion. And the bill also includes $100 million for the 2026 World Cup and $94 million for the 2028 Olympics to help transit agencies manage local transportation in support of games across the country. Madam Chair, this year's transportation and housing bill will provide greater economic certainty to communities across the country and improve the day-to-day lives of everyday people. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Connecticut reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to my very good friend, distinguished chairman of the Subcommittee on Defense of the Committee on Appropriations, the gentleman from California, Mr. Calvert.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, and I want to thank my good friend from Oklahoma, Chairman Tom Cole, to a job well done. I rise today in strong support of the Senate amendment to H.R. 7148, which includes my bill, the Department of Defense Appropriations Act of fiscal year 2026. This legislation was a true bipartisan effort by all 4 corners of the Defense Appropriations Committee. The world is more dangerous than ever. China continues its rapid military expansion. Russia and Iran remain persistent threats. Illicit drugs continue to harm Americans here at home. This bill answers to that challenge. It provides $839.2 billion to strengthen deterrence, support the administration's America First defense agenda, and to modernize our force. It invests in next-generation aircraft, the nuclear triad, critical munitions, missile defense, naval power, funding 17 new ships, and sustaining fleet readiness. The bill also drives innovation and efficiency, delivers a 3.8% pay raise for our service members, strengthens counter-drug efforts, and invests in our defense industrial base and infrastructure. These are strategic investments to protect the American people, project strength abroad, and I urge all my colleagues to support this bill. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California yields back. The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Hawaii, a member of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Case.
The gentleman from Hawaii is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this member as a member of the Appropriations Committee, as well as of our subcommittees on defense and on homeland security. Madam Speaker, I join the vast majority of Americans in condemning the actions of immigration and customs enforcement. Brutality and death in our streets, so-called leaders trashing victims and their grieving families, warrantless searches, fear in our own citizens. I had a state senator in my own district tell me this last week that she was fearful of going out to talk to her constituents in her district without her passport. This is unacceptable, this is un-American, and ICE must be reformed. And until it is, neither it nor its parent entity, the Department of Homeland Security, should be fully funded. And the best way for us to reform ICE is to keep our laser focus on ICE reform. And this measure does exactly that. It gives this administration and my majority colleagues 10 days to work with us all to do the right thing, and unless the right thing is done, we should not fund the Department of Homeland Security. But this measure also funds 70% of our federal government rather than shut it down again. And let me focus on just a few areas where this is critical. Let's start with defense, half of our total budget, in a time that it is critical to our national security that our Defense Department be fully operating, be fully focused, be nimble, be quick, the ability to adjust, and yet we have kept our Defense Department essentially crippled for 16 months now since the last time that we funded it in regular order and gave it direction through funding and oversight was fiscal year 2024. They've been operating on a continuing resolution for 16 months now, and that cripples national security. That is a national security risk. No new programs, procurement that is excessively expensive because it cannot function over multi-years, no effective system-wide modernization. Any military leader will tell you that the worst thing going for it right now, in a time when it has to adjust to the PRC, to Russia, across a variety of focuses, is now that it needs full flexibility. Financial services and general government, this bill funds the federal courts. Can we envision a time in our history when it was not more important that the federal courts be fully staffed and funding? I don't think so. This bill funds Social Security. It enables Social Security to continue to function for the millions of Americans who depend on it at a time when Social Security is being crippled by staff cuts. Foreign affairs. This bill provides continued security assistance to our friends and allies throughout the world. It maintains some effective projection of presence out there into the world. It funds the Countering PRC Influence Fund that is so important to us. Transportation, the Federal Aviation Administration, it funds the FAA so that our air transportation system can continue to fund. Federal workers overall, who have borne the brunt of our failure to appropriate in regular order, millions throughout our country, it helps them by assuring them that they can continue without great doubt. We must pass this measure now, and it must not be, need not be.
I yield the gentleman an additional minute.
Additional minute.
It must not be, need not be, and will not be at the expense of ICE reform. We sacrifice none of that mandate to reform ICE by passing this bill today. I would finally say to our Department of Homeland Security employees out there who have served us so well through so much difficulty, to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Homeland Security Investigations, Customs and Border Protection, Transportation Security Administration, you do critical work for us. And we apologize to you that we must create uncertainty to you for the foreseeable future, but we ask you to understand that reforming ICE is critical not just to those that are suffering at the hands of ICE, it is critical to our country. You will be paid. You will be paid because this continues your pay. But the uncertainty, until we get this resolved, you must live with. We appreciate your cooperation. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Connecticut reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to my very good friend, my classmate, the co-chairman of the full committee and the chairman of the subcommittee on national security and related programs, distinguished gentleman from Florida, Mr. Diaz-Balart.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and to Chairman Cole. Actually, I'm going to reserve what I'm going to say about Chairman Cole to the end, but also to the ranking member of the full committee, Congresswoman DeLauro, Congresswoman Frankel, the subcommittee ranking member. Look, this full-year funding really refocuses our nation's foreign policy in historic ways. It focuses on U.S. national security, but it does so while also restoring fiscal sanity. In this area, in the foreign policy arena, it actually reduces spending by 16%. But within those really historic reductions, the bill does more to counter our adversaries like China, Iran, the cartels in our hemisphere, and to support our allies and friends. It does a lot more, but spending a lot less money. Madam Speaker, the bill increases funding to counter fentanyl. It increases support for religious freedom and to address religious persecution around the planet. It maintains our longstanding pro-life provisions. And this bill removes controversial funding directives like the UN climate change. It makes double-digit reductions to the UN funding, and it, more importantly, or equally as important, it gives the Secretary of State the tools and leverage to demand much-needed reforms. These are historic changes, and this approach, again, protects American taxpayer, but also the national security interests of the United States. Now, Madam Speaker, we would not be here debating this if it wasn't for the brilliant, persistent leadership of the full committee chairman. A lot of folks said that we would never get here, that we would end up with another long-term CR, which would have been so detrimental to our country. But I will tell you, it was Tom Cole, yes, with his partners, but Tom Cole who brought us this far, who are going to actually get these bills passed, send them to the President for his signature. Mr. Chairman, we owe you, the country owes you, a debt of gratitude. Thank you, sir. I yield back, Madam Speaker.
The gentleman from Florida yields back. The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized. The gentlewoman reserves.
I'm sorry.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to my very good friend, the distinguished gentleman from Guam, Mr. Moylan.
The gentleman from Guam is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my friend Chairman Cole for the great work you have done on the appropriations. And that is why I rise today in support of the measure before us. The Senate amendment preserves the 5 bipartisan funding bills that this chamber has agreed to while giving us the necessary time to come to an agreement on Homeland Security funding. We simply cannot allow our troops or federal employees to miss another paycheck. If we fail to send this bill to the President's desk today, this shutdown will continue to drag on and limit access to the programs that Americans across the country rely on for health care, for education, and national security. Now in Guam, where the enlistment rate is the highest in the nation, many of our families rely on a timely paycheck for everyday needs. This bill strengthens support for our service member and includes 3.8% pay raise for all military personnel and continues to pay rate increases for our junior enlisted service members. So I strongly agree and urge my colleagues to support this measure and to support the American people. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentlelady from Connecticut reserves.
Thank you very much.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to my very good friend, distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the passage of this legislation will kick off a 10-day negotiation around an issue that is causing deep divisions throughout the country. I do believe we can come together around a set of reforms that will advance and focus the mission of Immigration and Customs Enforcement while protecting our officers and protecting the public. But such reforms must go hand in hand with a commitment to stop jurisdictions like Minnesota and California from releasing dangerous, wanted individuals as some sort of act of defiance, thereby forcing immigration authorities to go into communities rather than have an orderly transfer in a custodial setting. I want to read a quote on this topic. It reads as follows: "I do not consider it in the service of public safety to release an individual into the community when that individual can be released to Immigration and Customs Enforcement for prompt removal." That statement comes not from President Trump, not from Secretary Noem, but from Alejandro Mayorkas, President Biden's Secretary of Homeland Security.
The gentleman an additional 30 seconds, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman is recognized for additional 30 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, if even Secretary Mayorkas can recognize the folly of these so-called sanctuary policies, then all of us on both sides of the aisle should be able to hear as well. I yield back.
It's back. The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Gentlelady from Connecticut reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
I would advise my friend I'm prepared to close whenever she is.
Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
Thank the gentleman. I just want to outline for a moment the impacts of the failure to pass the 5 bipartisan House-passed spending measures, what that would do. Military personnel, extended shutdown will harm both military and civilian personnel at DOD who could not legally receive pay during a shutdown. Federal courts will no longer have funding to sustain full paid operations, and the courts can only carry out limited functions. The community development financial institutions, if that lapses, the money will be withheld in funding for over almost 1,500 credit unions, banks, and community financial institutions. The SBA would be unable to approve $170 million per day in loan assistance. Social Security Administration. Thousands of Social Security Administration employees would likely be furloughed, delays on the SSA's 800 number, limited hours of operation. The National Institutes of Health freeze funding for new research grants, including research, cancer, Alzheimer's, ALS, heart disease, diabetes, kidneys, mental health, maternal mortality, infectious disease, genetic diseases, and the list goes on and on and on. Community health centers would receive only partial funding to provide health care services for low-income patients. Head Start, if funding lapses, thousands of low-income children would be at risk of losing access to Head Start programs. Senior nutrition grants are at risk. That's Meals on Wheels as well as congregate meals. Worker protection agencies would likely furlough federal staff who are responsible for investigating wage theft, safety and health hazards in high-risk areas. That's just a small smattering of what the impact of the failure to pass these 5 bills, 5 bipartisan bills, where we had 341 yes votes in this chamber not 3 weeks ago. Now, some might say, well, what do you think about what ICE and the CBP are doing? I'm not unaware of that. I share the anger. I share the outrage of what they are done. And it is, yes, it's Minnesota, but it is also what's happening all over this country. People are being beat up. They're being pulled out of schools, pulled out of churches, and people frightened to death that they carry their passports with them. Their passports. And they're American citizens, and they're frightened. What have we proposed in this area? And we did, that's when we were doing the appropriations bills. Prohibition on detaining or deporting U.S. citizens, reducing funding for ICE, prohibition on the use of Border Patrol and CBP officers, and a requirement for DHS law enforcement to use body-worn cameras. Require reporting on the use of force. Training standards. They should be trained in de-escalation. And that's what ought to be happening in this, instead of fomenting escalation. Requiring ICE warrants. And there are other things. And I might add, just so that the people on the committee here understand, in June of 2025, the House Appropriations Committee advanced the FY 2026 Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Bill. It included bipartisan reforms and safeguards designed to protect U.S. citizens and vulnerable communities. However, when the bill was renegotiated in January 2026, these critical reforms were removed, but Democrats and Republicans voted for these reforms, and they must do it again. And the list goes on. No funds if DHS violates the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment. No funds for detaining again and deporting U.S. citizens. No prohibition on video recording for ICE. This was all passed in an appropriations committee and then stripped out. The fact of the matter is, look, we need to focus like a laser in these 10 days, 6 legislative days on DHS. Let's not have to focus on 5 agencies where there is agreement on what we do. And there is agreement on our side of the aisle. Despite what the press may report, there is no single Democrat in this body who believes what ICE and the CBP are doing is acceptable. And I cannot believe that a number of my Republican colleagues feel the same way. Let us focus in on the Department of Homeland Security. Let the public understand the nature of the fight. Quite honestly, let my Republican colleagues, let the administration defend the Department of Homeland Security and its lawlessness and recklessness when the majority of this country is seeing what they are doing. We all want the same thing. We want to keep our constituents safe. We want to stop the violence in the streets. We want to end chaos in our communities. And that these out-of-control agencies have created. The simple truth is we have a better chance of imposing real constraints on ICE and the CBP if this bill passes than if it fails. We have a better chance at securing justice. Justice for Renee Good and Alex Pretty and all of those people all over this country who have been harassed, who have been beaten, who've been taken out of their homes, 5-year-old children being detained. That's a reality. Nobody wants that. But we have a better chance of justice for these folks if this bill passes rather than if it fails. We have a better chance of putting an end to what has become a season of terror if this bill passes than if it fails. I'm asking my colleagues, understand the moment, meet the moment. We have an opportunity over these next several days to lay out the arguments against what the Department of Homeland Security and its leadership and what this administration has wrought on the American people. We serve in this body to be responsive to the American people. They are clamoring and they are crying out for help. We can help them with passing 5 bills that meet their needs. And we can help them by gaining control and focusing our ire and our anger over an agency that is run, in my view, by incompetence, by lies, and by terror. That is not who we are. Those are not the values of the American people. It is not the values of the people in this body. Everyone sees what is happening. And we can't let go of the gains that have been made that make a difference in people's lives, in the education of their kids, in their health, their safety, of looking at substance abuse and opioid addiction and how we can deal with that, transportation, rent assistance, homeless assistance, maternal mortality, child care, Head Start. It is two paths that we face today. One, if we pass the bills, and what our opportunities are to make a difference and make changes in an agency so needed to be changed. And I do believe we all recognize that. And at the same time, to say to the American people, we understand the crisis of a cost of living that you have. And we are there to defend you and your family and to make life and make government work on your behalf. That is our responsibility. I view that as my responsibility as the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee. This is the way our government functions. I thank you. Again, we have a better chance to end the season of terror. I thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the balance of my time. Mr. Speaker, when you reach a point like this, there's a lot of people to thank. I want to begin by thanking the President of the United States. He supported each and every one of these tranches of bills that have been brought to the floor during this critical month where we completed the appropriations process. We would not be here today without him. We would probably not be voting on this bill without him. He was working today tirelessly to make sure we followed our own procedures and brought this bill to the floor. So I want to personally thank President Trump for his contribution to funding the government. People forget around here, he has to sign the bills. If he doesn't sign them, believe me, he can sustain any veto he cares to cast. He's used his influence and his power constructively to bring us together across partisan lines and to pass what are bipartisan, bicameral bills, and I'm eternally grateful for that. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my own leadership. I don't know where Speaker Johnson got his patience from, but it must be God-given, because his support throughout this process, working with us, never giving up, trying to restore regular order has been incredible and I think unparalleled in the history of the speakership, in my view. I want to thank the other members of our leadership, Leader Scalise, Whip Emmer, Conference Chair McClain. They all worked really hard to make sure that we could come together, work across the lines, give us the freedom and flexibility that we needed, but also provide the persuasion that was necessary both within our own ranks and across the aisle. I want to thank especially the Cardinals and the ranking members of the subcommittee. The ranking member and I agree. We had tried to force decision-making down because we trust our Cardinals and ranking members. They know their subjects. They know one another. They work together. Without them, and they solved most of the issues that were before us, we wouldn't be here. And that model worked well because the people that we relied on, our chairman and our ranking members, were people that we know and trust, and frankly, that know one another and trust one another and work well together. I'm extraordinarily proud of this committee for what it did. I also particularly want to thank my friend, the ranking member, across the aisle. Now, we don't always agree. As a matter of fact, once our mutual friend and former colleague, Ambassador Rahm Emanuel, called us the odd couple That may be true. We don't usually start in the same place. But we are here today able to fund the government, 76% of the government of the United States, because of the ranking member and because of her leadership and her hard work to find common ground. I admire her tremendously as a person. I appreciate her as a working partner. We also had working partners in the United States Senate. We didn't have Chairman Collins. We didn't have Ranking Member Patty Murray. We wouldn't be here either. Again, this is not just a bipartisan or a House agreement. This is a bicameral agreement, and those institutional lines are sometimes more difficult than the partisan lines to negotiate. We managed to do that. I'm proud of each and every one of my ranking partners, but particularly the ranking member of my committee, the Appropriations Committee in the House. So we've had a lot of folks that have worked hard, and we may have some disagreements in the coming days. Probably will. I'd be surprised if we don't. But I know if we work hard, we can work through them and get to a successful conclusion. My friend, for instance, mentioned body cameras. I couldn't agree more. It was something we added in the bill, but it was something she advocated for and championed. We agree on the need for additional training. There's lots we can find in common as we try to work through this, and I hope we're able to do that. But the important thing today, Mr. Speaker, is to finish the task. To take these bills, which represent the vast majority of things where we have found common ground, an agreement, and a process of give and take and good faith efforts and compromise and debate, and make sure that they pass and reach the President's desk so we do not put American federal workers and American soldiers and American public servants out of work. We let them do their job on behalf of the American people. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I want to urge all my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support what is genuinely a bicameral and bipartisan product, and one that the President has signed and urged, or will sign, and has urged us to pass. And with that, Mr. Speaker, again, I urge passage of this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 1032, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion by the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Lady
Mr. Speaker, I requested yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays. The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.